There is something living inside your brain that no other animal on Earth has. It is not intelligence. It is not language. It is not memory. It is the knowledge that one day you are going to die. You were not born with it. At some point in your childhood, it switched on. And the moment it did, nothing was ever the same again. Now, imagine that happening to an entire species. For hundreds of thousands of years, ancient humans lived, hunted, and died with no awareness that death was even coming. No fear of the future, no grief for what will be lost. Just the present moment, over and over, until it stopped. Then, something changed. Researchers believe there was a specific window in prehistoric time, somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 years ago, when the human brain crossed a threshold it had never crossed before. And on the other side of that threshold was a thought so enormous, so terrifying, so completely new, that it may have rewritten what it means to be human. The thought was simple. I am going to die. What happened next is one of the most extraordinary and unsettling stories in the entire history of our species. The scientific term for this awareness is mortality salience, the conscious knowledge that your own death is inevitable, that it is coming, that nothing you do will stop it. Every psychologist, anthropologist, and philosopher who has studied this agrees on one thing. It is the most destabilizing thought a human mind can produce. And our ancestors had to experience it for the very first time, with no religion to comfort them, no afterlife to hope for, no language sophisticated enough to even fully process what they were feeling. Just the raw, crushing weight of knowing. So how do we know when it happened? We cannot read ancient minds, but we can read what ancient humans left behind. And what they left behind tells a story that most people have never heard. The first clue comes from burial sites. For most of human prehistory, the dead were not buried. Bodies were simply left, abandoned. There was no ceremony, no grave goods, no flowers, no markings. Then, approximately 100,000 years ago, something changed. At a site called Skull Cave in present-day Israel, archaeologists discovered the remains of at least 10 individuals deliberately buried in the ground, dating to roughly 100,000 years ago. Some of the bodies were positioned carefully. Some were buried with objects, a boar's jaw, a shell. Dr. Francesco of the University of Bordeaux has spent decades studying the emergence of symbolic behavior in early humans. His conclusion is striking. Deliberate burial is not just a practical act. It is a symbolic one. It requires the understanding that death is permanent, that the person is gone, that something must be done to mark their absence. You do not bury someone unless you understand what death means.
But burial is only the beginning. Around the same period, something else appears in the archaeological record, something even more revealing. Ochre. Red ochre is an iron-rich pigment found naturally in the earth. Ancient humans began using it approximately 100,000 years ago, possibly earlier. They ground it into powder, they mixed it with fat, they painted with it. They painted on cave walls, they painted on their own bodies, and they painted on the bodies of their dead. Why red?
Researchers believe red ochre represented blood, and blood represented life. Painting a dead body with the color of life may have been the earliest known attempt by humans to reverse death, or at least to protest it. Dr. Lynn Wadley of the University of the Witwatersrand discovered ochre processing kits at Blombos Cave in South Africa, dating to 100,000 years ago. Tiny shell containers, grinding stones, mixing tools, a complete toolkit for producing the pigment of life. Ancient humans were not just surviving, they were responding to something internal, something terrifying. They had looked at death and decided it required an answer.
Here is the question that should stop you completely. What does it feel like to be the first human who ever understood they were going to die? No one to explain it, no tradition to fall back on, no story that had ever been told about what happens after. Just a mind that had grown complex enough to see its own ending and nothing in the entire universe to tell it why. Psychologists call this the existential crisis, the confrontation with mortality that every human eventually faces. For us, it happens in childhood, usually between the ages of 4 and 7. Research by Dr. Virginia Slaughter at the University of Queensland shows that children gradually develop the understanding that death is universal, inevitable, and permanent. And when they fully grasp it, many experience profound fear and confusion. We have parents to comfort us. We have language to process it. We have thousands of years of culture built specifically to help us cope. Our ancestors had none of that. They faced the existential crisis completely alone, for the first time in the history of life on Earth. And here is what makes this moment so important. Every single thing that defines human civilization may have grown directly from that terror. Religion, the belief in an afterlife, art, music, storytelling, philosophy, the desperate human need to find meaning. Terror management theory, first proposed by social psychologists Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Pyszczynski in 1986, building on the work of anthropologist Ernest Becker, argues that human culture itself is largely a response to death anxiety. That everything we build, everything we believe, everything we create is on some level an attempt to deny or transcend our own mortality. Becker's 1973 book, The Denial of Death, argued that the awareness of mortality is the engine of human civilization. That without death terror, there would be no pyramids, no cathedrals, no empires, no art, no gods. We built the entire human world to distract ourselves from the one fact we cannot change. Go back 100,000 years. A small group of ancient humans sitting around a fire on the African savanna. One of them has just watched someone they love die. And for the first time in the entire 4 billion year history of life on Earth, a living creature looks at that death and understands. That will happen to me. They cannot speak it clearly. They do not have the words, but the feeling is there. Heavy, enormous, completely new. They reach for red ochre and paint the body of the person they lost. They do not know why. They only know they have to do something. That gesture, that first desperate human response to the knowledge of death, is the beginning of everything. Every religion ever created, every work of art ever made, every grave ever dug, every prayer ever whispered into the dark. It all started in that moment, with one ancient human sitting beside someone they loved, understanding for the very first time that the story ends, and refusing, the way humans always have, to simply accept it.